date was October 25th, 1944, at 0300 hours. The place, the narrow waters of Surigao Strait in the Philippines. In the darkness, a Japanese naval force steams northward through a deadly gauntlet. What they don't know is that the United States Navy is waiting for them on the other end. And what's about to unfold will be the last battleship-versus-battleship engagement in naval history. This is the story of a meticulously planned ambush, a desperate Japanese gamble, and a clash that would help seal the fate of the Pacific War. To understand Surigao Strait, we need to take a look at the big picture. In October of 1944, American forces under General Douglas MacArthur were invading the Philippines, specifically landing at Leyte Gulf. This was a knife to the heart of the Japanese Empire. The Philippines sat astride Japan's supply lines to the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies, and without that oil, the Japanese war machine would grind to a halt. The Japanese devised a desperate plan called Shogo, or Victory Operation. It was all or nothing. They would use nearly every operational warship they had left, divided into three forces to attack the American invasion fleet from multiple directions. The northern force under Admiral Ozawa would act as bait, using Japan's remaining aircraft carriers, now almost empty of planes, to lure away the powerful American Third Fleet under Admiral Halsey. This worked to a T, by the way. The center force, the most powerful, would approach through the San Bernardino Strait, and the southern force would split into two groups and approach through Surigao Strait, the narrow waterway we're talking about in this episode. Commanding the southern force's main element was Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura, a 54-year-old veteran with a reputation for aggressive tactics and unwavering determination. His force was modest but formidable. The battleships Yamashiro and Fuso, both veterans of the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, the heavy cruiser Mugami, and 4 destroyers. Following several hours behind was a second element under Vice Admiral Kyohide Shima, 2 heavy cruisers, a light cruiser, and 4 destroyers. The lack of coordination between these 2 commanders would prove fateful. Waiting for the Japanese was Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf, commanding the 7th Fleet's Bombardment and Fire Support Group. Oldendorf had advance warning from scout planes and submarines that the Japanese were coming. He had time to prepare something the Japanese didn't expect: a perfect ambush. Oldendorf positioned his 6 battleships in a line across the northern exit of the strait: the West Virginia, the Maryland, the USS Mississippi, the Tennessee, the California, and the Pennsylvania. 5 of these were veterans of Pearl Harbor, raised from the mud and now hungry for revenge. This classic naval formation, called crossing the T, would allow all of his ships to fire broadside at the Japanese while the enemy could only fire their guns forward. But the battleships were just the final blow. Oldendorf created a layered defense. First, 39 small PT boats would harass the Japanese as they entered the strait. Then 2 destroyer squadrons would conduct torpedo attacks from both flanks. Behind them, his cruisers would open fire. Only then would the battleships unleash their devastating 14 and 16-inch guns. The Americans had another crucial advantage: radar. While the Japanese would be navigating by dead reckoning in the darkness, American ships could track targets precisely and fire with deadly accuracy without even seeing the enemy. Oldendorf's plan was textbook naval warfare, but it required perfect timing, discipline, and nerve. At 10:30 p.m. on October the 24th, Admiral Nishimura's force entered Surigao Strait. He knew he was heading into danger. Reconnaissance planes had spotted American ships earlier in the day, but Nishimura had his orders, and his samurai code demanded he press forward. Some historians believe he knew that this was a suicide mission, but he would do his duty regardless. The strait was a terrible place for a naval battle. Only 12 miles wide at its narrowest point, with small islands and treacherous currents that offered no room to maneuver. The Japanese would have to steam straight ahead, unable to dodge or retreat. As midnight approached, American PT boats picked up Japanese forces on radar. The Mosquito fleet attacked with torpedoes, their small boats darting in and out of the darkness. While they scored no hits, they provided constant position updates to Oldendorf and harassed the Japanese force, fraying nerves and forcing evasive maneuvers. At 0300 hours, even larger action began. American destroyers from 2 squadrons roared in from both sides of the strait, launching a coordinated torpedo attack. These were close-range engagements in pitch darkness, the kind of combat that required nerves of steel and perfect timing. At 0309, catastrophe struck the Japanese. A spread of torpedoes slammed into the battleship Fuso. Massive explosions tore through her hull. Within minutes, she broke in half, both sections burning furiously. Over 1,600 men went down with her, the first battleship casualty of the night. The destroyers pressed their attack. Torpedoes found the destroyer Yamagumo. She exploded and sank. The destroyer Michishio took multiple hits. The destroyer Asagumo was crippled, falling behind the Japanese formation, trailing smoke and fire. Admiral Nishimura pressed on with what remained. His flagship, Yamashiro, the Mogami, and 1 destroyer, Shiguri. The Japanese flagship maintained radio silence. Either his communications were damaged or he chose not to report his losses. Either way, he was leading what remained of his force straight toward the American battle line. Behind him, Admiral Shima's separate force was finally entering the strait, hours late and with no clear picture of the carnage ahead. At 0350, Nishimura's radar operators detected the American battle line ahead. He was now just 20 miles from his objective, but it was too late. On the bridge of his flagship, the USS West Virginia, Admiral Oldendorf received reports of the destroyer attacks. Everything was going according to plan. Now it was time for the main event. At 0351, Admiral Oldendorf gave the order, open fire. The West Virginia's 16-inch guns thundered, using radar to aim at targets she couldn't even see. At a range of 22,800 yards, nearly 13 miles, her shells arced through the darkness toward the Yamashiro. Other battleships joined in, their muzzle flashes lighting up the night like lightning. For the next 18 minutes, the American battle line poured an incredible volume of fire onto the Japanese force. The Yamashiro was hit repeatedly. Massive shells plunged through her decks, starting fires and causing explosions throughout the ship. The cruiser Mogami was also hit and set ablaze. The Japanese fought back valiantly. Yamashiro and Mogami returned fire, but they could barely see their targets, and their shells mostly fell short or wide. They were silhouetted against their own burning ships while the Americans remained invisible in the northern darkness. This was exactly what Oldendorf had planned, a one-sided attack, the perfect execution of crossing the T. At 0409, Admiral Oldendorf ordered ceasefire. He didn't want his ships firing on each other in the confusion. When the smoke cleared and dawn approached, spotters observed the Yamashiro dead in the water, burning from stern to stern, listing heavily. At 0419, she capsized and sank, taking Admiral Nishimura and most of her 1,400-man crew with her. The admiral went down with his ship, fulfilling his duty till the end. Only one Japanese ship from Nishimura's force escaped unscathed, the destroyer Shiguri, which had miraculously dodged every torpedo and shell. She turned and fled south through the strait. The crippled cruiser Mogami also attempted to retreat, but she was intercepted by Admiral Shima's force, which was just arriving. In the confusion and darkness, Shima's flagship, the cruiser Nachi, collided with the burning Mogami, damaging both ships. Shima, seeing the destruction and realizing the battle was lost, made the prudent decision to withdraw. There was no point in sacrificing his ships in a hopeless attack. His force turned and retreated south, harassed by American PT boats and aircraft the entire way. The crippled Mogami didn't make it far. The next morning, American aircraft caught up with her and sent her to the bottom. When the sun rose on October 25th, the results were devastating for Japan. 2 battleships sunk, 1 heavy cruiser sunk, 3 destroyers, nearly 4,000 Japanese sailors lost. The Americans suffered only minor damage to a few destroyers and minimal casualties. The Battle of Surigao Strait was just one of the larger Battle of Leyte Gulf, which raged across October 23rd through the 26th of 1944, but it held special significance. It was the last time in history that battleships fought battleships, the culmination of a type of naval warfare that had dominated for centuries. 5 of the 6 American battleships at Surigao Strait had been at Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 1941. Their participation at Surigao represented both practical revenge and poetic justice. The vessels, written off as obsolete, had returned to prove their worth one final time. After Surigao Strait, the age of the battleship was truly over. American carriers, submarines, and eventually guided missiles would dominate naval warfare. The era of massive gun duels between armored giants had passed into history. But on that dark night in October of 1944, in a narrow strait in the Philippines, the battleship had its final decisive moment. A perfectly executed ambush that helped turn the tide of the Pacific War. The Battle of Surigao Strait, the last stand of the battleship age, and a victory that brought the Allies one step closer to Japan.